hey, congratulations on your film, Sleeping Dogs.
Oh, thanks, man.
You know what? I love these type of mystery detective noir type of films, but I have to hear it from you is where you got this original idea from? Because I'm familiar with a lot of your writing and your past blockbuster films, and this is something very, very different.
Yeah, I mean, there's an intimacy to the story in that it's kind of this portrait of this man who's in crisis, who um, is struggling with his memory, and the idea actually came from a book called the Book of Mirrors, which was written by a Romanian thriller author who was writing in English for the first time, whose name is Io Chirivici. And the book was brought to me by a manager producer whose name is Puya Shabazian, who I met during Allegiant, and he had brought us the book in galley form before it was published. And I was just really compelled by the Roy Freeman character in this book, so much so that we re-lensed the mystery that exists in the book, the murder of this college professor and his association with, a teaching assistant and another student. We re-lensed the whole narrative of the book through the eyes of the character that Russell plays, because it's very different in the book. But I was just really compelled by, it's very much a story about how, um, truth is a point of view, and memory of things in the past isn't necessarily an accurate recollection of what transpired. And it felt thematically on point to be exploring that through the lens of a character who himself is bereft of memory. So I think I was really drawn to the idea of telling a story where the audience is in lockstep with the character's own experience in unraveling the mystery. So I think it's very possible that with any film like this that's in the mystery or suspense genre, that a more astute or studied viewer of film could at any point in time be ahead or behind the narrative. But I really wanted to try to make a film where the audience is kind of in lockstep with the character, where you don't get any information ahead of the character.
Now, was it difficult to basically navigate, the mysteries, the twists and turns, trying to make us as the audience trying to connect the dots through what we through what we remember watching the film?
Yeah, I mean, I think you want to make sure that you've seeded in all the information in the lead up to any given reveal. So if you look back on the film, you can connect the dots, because it can be a little bit of an overwhelm, I think, for a first time view where you're trying to, you know, uh, make sense of everything that sort of led up to the moments, but you want to make sure that the moments are there, right? That everything feels earned, right? That it doesn't feel like you've just sort of tacked this thing on
Mhm.
and you didn't foam the runway with the information. It's like when you watch a Christopher Nolan film like Interstellar or Memento for that matter, or Inception, right? Like it's a bit of an overwhelm of information, but they
Mhm.
do all add up. So it was important that the mysteries add up, and the different characters' perception on events, um, that they aligned with one another, ultimately when you put the puzzle together. Um, Important, but I think the initial challenge of that was on the page. Um, and as a director, being aware of all of that content so that when you're talking to your actors, they understand, that their line, that their perspective on this truth all makes sense. But you know, it all really came out in the post-production process. That's when you really are hyper focused on making sure that all of those elements are there.
That is true. And as a director, what, tricks that you want to make sure to include into your direction of the film to make sure that we don't get lost, because Christopher Nolan is, as you mentioned, is very good at this, but you probably want to make sure that there are certain things, whether it's camera angles or color schemes that to
Mhm.
basically reel the audiences in.
Yeah, so I mean, there's two different visual palettes in this film. There's the present tense palette, and then there's the past tense palette, right? So the present tense palette was deliberately designed to be sort of more colorless and desaturated because that's the nature of the character's experience, right? He's bereft of memory. His world is more colorless. It's grim. Um, and it's also a little bit confusing, his world. So we shot all the present tense stuff with Russell's character with anamorphic lenses, which sort of bends the edges of the frame, so everything's a little bit out of whack. Um, and all the stuff in the present tense was shot with those lenses. Um, and the color palette of the narrative begins very grim, very desaturated, and over the course of the narrative for him, as he starts to re-engage in the world, we see more color into it, and everything gets a little bit brighter for him as things start to come back. Everything in the past was shot on these Minolta spherical lenses that were rehoused from the 70s. And that's a more saturated, warmer color palette because much of it exists sort of in the world of this professor in his home with wood paneling and nice art and fire, and everything's sort of a bit richer. So it was important to sort of draw that distinction so the audience understood, okay, we're in one instance we're dealing with sort of the nature of Roy's reality, and in another instance we're dealing with a memory
Hmm.
of of the past. So it was important to do that.
Absolutely. And let's not forget to talk about Russell Crowe, because out of all the actors that could pull this off, he definitely pulled it off. And it must have been a delight for you to direct someone who probably doesn't need too much direction. So
I think that's 100% right. He does not need too much direction. It's a little bit like turn the camera on and get out of the way. Um, I think his performance is subtle and powerful, and internal. He does a tremendous amount with just his eyes. I think there's sort of a special kind of sensitivity to his performance. I feel really grateful to have gotten the opportunity to work with him. He was a real ally in just the process. You know, I think he was, just super helpful as it related to camera setups. Like if he saw something that he thought was extraneous and was going to take up too much time and that we didn't need it and that he could sell what we needed to sell for our story in a different way, he would suggest those kinds of things. So it was really great for me as a first time filmmaker to be working with a person who's made so many films, who's directed his own films, who understands what everybody does, who walks on set and asks, what lens is that? What lens is that as it relates to lens length? Because he's all about just acting within the frame. So he's incredibly camera aware, very generous with other actors. I think he makes everybody else better.
well, it's excellent. Well, Adam, let me wrap it up with one last thing, because this is your directorial debut, and you've been a writer in the industry for such a long time, working on a lot of big blockbusters. What made you to do this sudden turn, and how was your enjoyment, being behind the camera, working on the project?
Well, I moved to Los Angeles wanting to be a director, and wanting to use writing as the mechanism by which I would one day achieve that. I think, but there have only been a couple things that I'd written that I felt like were things that I would really want to direct. So it wasn't so much like a sudden turn as, they just hadn't been the right projects. And, I wasn't so much focused on writing things for me to direct. I think what drew me to this project was sort of that it was an intimate story about a man who was in crisis and a journey that he was going to go on to be made more whole, for better or for worse. Um, but I think it was really an exhilarating experience getting to do it, equal parts excitement and terror as it relates to kind of the unknown of what you're stepping into. And I think as a filmmaker, I learned a lot about sort of the practicality with which one tells a story. Because as a writer, especially on big things, you have license to just write whatever you want,
Mhm.
right? Because they'll pay for it somehow. But when you're dealing with something on a budget, you don't have the same license and freedom to just write whatever you want. You have to figure out sort of inventive ways to tell story. Um, but it was a really, really special experience to get to see something that I'd written come to life and be in control of its sort of creative destiny. So I'm super excited to get to do it again, um, and to get to do it with such an amazing collection of other creatives from Russell, Karen, and Martin, and Thomas Wright, and Ben Knott, who was my DP, and Matt Vila, and David Hirschfelder, my editor and composer, respectively. Like, what a just great experience. I don't take it for granted. It is, I'm just really grateful to have had the experience.
Well, it's a terrific movie. And any movie that you get Russell Crowe to shave his head, it's a great movie. So,
He didn't shave his head.
but there we go.
That's a
Well,
bald cap.
we'll keep that to ourselves. But anyways, thank you very much, Adam, for
Thanks,
talking to us about Sleeping Dogs. Next time.
thanks, man. Appreciate it.